to talk Daisy Jones and the Six. I'm Kristen, I'm an entertainment journalist, and I watched the entire season of Daisy Jones and the Six already. Plus, I read the book by Taylor Jenkins Reid so I could give more accurate thoughts on this adaptation. So I'm going to talk about the series as a whole, and then any kind of spoilers that do come up, they'll only be around these first 3 episodes that are already out. So Daisy Jones and the Six is a magnetic and high-energy story that tells the rise and fall of legendary rock musicians. It's full of complicated, sometimes toxic, and layered characters. And at the time of having just seen the series alone, I really felt like Riley Keough, Sam Claflin, Camilla Morone, and Nabia B were the standouts for me, and I had wished that the supporting band members got just a little bit more screen time. The finale is definitely one of the best you're going to see this year, and the soundtrack, I think fans are absolutely going to love it, devour it, be listening to it on repeat. And while I liked the series and I had fun, I did feel like something was missing a little bit, so I decided to read the book so I could really just dive deeper into this world. Since reading the book, there's definitely things that I think were changed that were a little bit unnecessary. There's some things that I think do make sense. There's some things that I think changed characters for the better and for the worse. I would say there's no doubt, though, that the main focus of this series is Daisy and Billy. The chemistry between those two is insane. Like, I have never seen 2 people sharing a mic be such an intimate moment. And when it comes to Camilla, while I enjoyed her performance, I think once you kind of understand who she is from the book, it kind of feels like they took some of that strength away in the series. I think she does still have some good moments of like owning her own path and being in control. But as the season goes on, they definitely fall into these cliche jealousy patterns that I think you expect in a love triangle like this, but that wasn't in the book, and that was refreshing that it wasn't part of that story. And in reading the book, Camilla was really the heart of this story. She had some of my favorite lines, one of them in particular about like she's not gonna let a man at his weakest decide her future for her, and just her being in charge of her own life. And I do think they diminished some of that to focus more on Daisy and Billy and their toxic relationship. And speaking of that, I do think that their relationship in the show is even more toxic than it was in the book. I feel like the first 3 episodes are a little misleading because we haven't even gotten to them all being a group yet. But I do think that like they take things a little too far at times, whereas in the book I appreciated the restraint. Although I do think they did a really solid job of keeping Billy as this good guy that you root for despite the mistakes he's made in his past. And that's why I think it's so easy for you to still root for him with Daisy, with Camilla, and just what they represent for him I thought was so fascinating. Camilla is the light, she's the stability, the sobriety, the family, the future. She represents sort of who he could be if he's trying to be the best version of himself. Then you have Daisy representing the dark, the broken, the toxic, the drugs, the easy way out if you just kind of give in to your demons. So I feel like they sort of represent the 2 sides of Billy and, you know, which side will he give into in the end. I gotta say though, I kind of found Daisy to be more immature in the show, and I was definitely rooting for Camilla and just him going down, you know, the straight and narrow path. Simone was a character that I think they did a really great job expanding on in the show. You know, in the book, she's pretty much just Daisy's best friend who's a musician, and that was really it. Whereas in the show, we really get to see her own story as a Black queer disco pioneer. I want to talk about some of the other band members as well. I do feel like for the most part, they tackled what was in the book for them, but I just wish we got to see more. You know how in The Last of Us, they're taking like full episodes to explore smaller side characters that showed up in the video game but didn't really have a backstory, and just giving them more robust storylines? I kind of wish they did a little bit more of that here. They did a great job expanding Simone's story, but even she didn't feel like she had as big of a role as you would have liked to see, and the same thing with the other supporting band members. The reality is we really get to see them have their big moments in those first 3 episodes and then in the finale, and the rest of the time it's just the Daisy and Billy show. They do set up some interesting things with Eddie, and I will say they sort of take other characters' stories from the book and give them to him, and I think they were trying to do that to really flesh out, you know, the bitterness that he has of kind of being, I wouldn't even say second fiddle because he's not even really second fiddle to Billy, but like, you know, not being the leader of the band and getting the girl and, you know, being the one in charge. But there was something about this actor that I felt like he didn't nail this role. He was very forgettable. I thought he was one of the weaker links, even though he had like a bigger story that is supposed to have more impact. When it comes to the whole Chuck versus Pete debacle, I think it kind of made sense that they didn't include him, even though it kind of makes the idea of like the 6 confusing because there's not 6 of them. But in the book, Chuck is the rhythm guitarist, and he ends up getting shipped off to Vietnam and being killed, and Pete ends up coming in to replace him. The reality is Pete doesn't even speak in the book. He has one line at the very, very end. The only time Pete is really in the story is when other people are talking about him. And so it did feel like kind of a waste to include this character who doesn't really have their own voice or tell their story or contribute in a meaningful way. So I get why they removed him, and instead they combined him to become Chuck Loving, who was their bassist and then left to become a dentist before they even made it big. And then you have Billy taking on the role of guitar and lead singer while they relay Eddie to becoming the bassist. But because of that, now there's only 5 members in the band, and Camilla, I would say, becomes the unofficial 6th member of the 6, as she ends up going to California way earlier with the group and being part of trying to help them make it big. With Karen and Graham, I think for the most part people are going to be satisfied with where their story goes. And then with Warren, I really liked him. He was funny in the book and in the show. I think this was like one of the most spot-on casting choices, but just another example of like, I would have loved to see even more of him. They did everything that was in the book with him, but I just thought he was so great, I would have added in more scenes. Spinning off of that, there definitely were some moments from the books that I definitely missed. Maybe certain scenes that I think really reflected characters' personalities very well. Some of the moments where the women were supporting and empowering each other. There were definitely a couple of moments that did make it into the show, like when Karen wants to talk to Camilla before joining the group, or when Karen kind of gets the guys out of the studio so that Daisy can really like do her own thing and not feel like everyone's watching her. So those moments I appreciated, but there were definitely a few moments that I think they cut out that would have been really just like empowering and just powerful to see, some of these women supporting each other in these various ways. And then there were definitely some changes that I think even changed motivations for certain characters. So in the book, for instance, Billy and Camilla meet after Billy has like seen his father who like left them, and it's kind of like a big emotional moment. To see them meeting then feels powerful. Whereas in the show, they meet at a laundromat, and it's like, what's the significance there? Billy never quit the band either, like he did in the show. He also didn't propose to Camilla just because she was pregnant, and I actually really didn't like that, because to me it felt like now the reason that Billy is staying with Camilla isn't because he loves her, but because he feels this sense of duty and family, which I don't think is true. Teddy also does go to listen to the band, They don't have to go chase him down at a grocery store. And I think they also made Daisy much more of an amateur in the show than she was in the book. She already had a problematic manager, a record deal, a cover album out at the point of meeting the 6 and hopping on Honeycomb. And there were definitely some great things that they kept in, or even expanded upon, like we already mentioned Simone, but I would also say that moment when Billy does see his father who left them, we actually get to see him confront him in the show and kind of have that resolution. Or, you get to see Daisy's up and down line at the diner. You get to see her confront the guys who are trying to use her as a muse. The I'm somebody line was really key in the book, and I think you really get to see that in the show. And there's also this really fun moment where Daisy and the 6 almost cross paths. You see like she's leaving the diner that she's working at and they're sitting there eating. And I was like, oh, like that's so exciting. Like just a little fun nod of like their paths crossing before they really get to come together as a group. But when it comes down to what was missing for me, I feel like it was the authenticity around being in the music industry. I feel like they made it seem like the 6 and Daisy had it fairly easy to get discovered and make it. Daisy wants to write, she hops in this song, she records for the very first time ever in the recording studio, and it's a hit. And I'm like, that just seems too easy. I would have liked there to be like just a little bit more grit, or even, follow along with what happened in the book, which was, she had already been established at that point. I thought the book just was like a little bit grittier and realistic when it came to the hustle of making it in music. And I just don't think that they necessarily made us believe that this band is as big as they are, like I feel like we needed a little bit more there. And I do think it became formulaic and leaned into the classic cliches of what it means to be in rock and roll, the drugs, sex, partying, cheating, all that stuff. When it comes down to it, I do think the first 3 episodes, they're a little slow. It definitely picks up as the season goes on, but I also think it gets way more toxic as the season goes on. And then, like I said, the finale was incredible. The cast is great. The album is awesome. They're balancing telling the story while giving us this documentary music format. I do think you start to kind of lose that format a little bit. Maybe like 80% of the show is just telling the story, and maybe 20% is seeing that documentary stuff. After a while, I kind of forgot that it was supposed to be a documentary. The live performances that they do, top tier. I just think things got messy with the storytelling and just how toxic it gets. And I think if you don't already know the story, it is a little confusing. And there's definitely times where it feels like they skip over things and they just want you to assume certain stuff has happened, but they don't really show it to you. And so it started to feel a little convoluted and messy, like they're cutting corners to tell the story. The show also takes place 20 years after they broke up versus the book, which they were like senior citizens in the book. So I was curious if, this is supposed to be a limited series, but I wonder if it's so successful, if maybe they will try to make a second season, and, the actors are definitely young enough that they could do like a reunion tour, so to speak. So I'm curious, like, if that could be on the table at all. All in all, I liked the show. I don't think I loved it as much as I wanted to. I do think it has a lot of potential to be really big. I would definitely go watch Daisy Jones and the Six perform their Aurora album, 100%. But at the same time, I just feel like the book had this heart and grit and restraint that I think was missing a bit from the show in favor of going the toxic formulaic route of cliches when it comes to the rock and music industry. I would love to hear your thoughts on Daisy Jones and the Six, and let me know if you want to see a book versus TV show comparison, because I have a lot of notes of all the differences and similarities between the two, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. And let me know your favorite song in the Aurora album, because mine is definitely Look at Us Now, Honeycomb. Baby, baby, baby. I'm obsessed. I've been listening to it on repeat. Consider subscribing if you like my videos, and if you want to talk more TV and movies with me outside of the comments section, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/kmaldo. If you like this one, you can check out more of my videos right over here. See ya!